Hello and welcome, everyone. Great to see you. And welcome to this month's MillerKnoll Design Perspectives. Today, MillerKnoll's Director of Archives and Brand Heritage, Amy Auscherman, will be in conversation with the Cranbrook Academy of Arts, Andrew Satake Blauvelt. Andrew is the Director of Cranbrook Art Museum, and he is joined today by Bridget Bartal, MillerKnoll's Curatorial Fellow. Together, they'll share and discuss the MillerKnoll Archives. This is our one-of-a-kind space and is located in our West Michigan headquarters. It is dedicated to preserving the design legacy of our collective of brands. In addition, we'll explore Cranbrook's latest exhibition, which is Everything Eventually Connects. This exhibit showcases the relationship between people, ideas, and objects. This is a significant exploration of the mid-century modern movement and includes the contribution of women, designers of color, and the LGBTQ+ individuals. Featuring approximately 200 works by 100 artists, this exhibit highlights Cranbrook's pivotal role in shaping the modern movement. Just some housekeeping rules today and suggestions. You will be on mute, but we do welcome your thoughts, your ideas, and your questions. We always reserve a few minutes at the end so that we can engage with our audience members. So if you do have things you'd like to share, pop them into your chat, use your reaction buttons. And at this time, I'm going to pass this over to Amy Auscherman to get us started. Amy?
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm so excited to be here today and to share the stage with Andrew and Bridget. We're going to kick off talking about a project that we completed earlier this year here at the MillerKnoll headquarters. In our joining of Herman Miller and Knoll, me and my team had the very fun job of integrating the historic archives of the brand and now have a collecting remit across all MillerKnoll brands, which also means that we can collect contemporary design, which is really exciting. We started off in our space with an exhibition entitled Manufacturing Modern that I'll get into, but giving you a sense of what it looks like in here. It's an 11,000 square foot space. We have a furniture collection that totals roughly 3,000 pieces, and we have about 300 of them on display. And so Manufacturing Modern is meant to illustrate, Andrew and Bridget will get into some of it, but MillerKnoll's origins actually trace back to the beginnings of modern design, an early 20th century movement whose guiding principles drove Knoll and Herman Miller to produce designs that were ever more purposeful, innovative, and accessible. The visionaries who shaped these companies, Florence Knoll, George Nelson, Eero Saarinen, Ray and Charles Eames, Harry Bertoia, Mies van der Rohe, Marcel Breuer, all offer really direct connections to the institutions at the forefront of the modernist movement. The Bauhaus, the Museum of Modern Art, and appropriately, Michigan's own Cranbrook Academy of Art, as well as the Museum of Modern Art. So in this space, you're seeing objects designed by the Eameses in collaboration with their, old Cranbrook buddy, Harry Bertoia, who is also practicing sculpture, but the space really gives you a sense of those shared connections between Herman Miller and Knoll, and truly kind of the shared DNA that both companies share. I'll say too, so our furniture collection, like I said, totals about 3,000 pieces. 300 of them are on display, and we have them initially arranged in chronological order. And so you really get to see a development of modern furniture in America, initially through the lenses of Herman Miller and Knoll, but you start to see new experiments in material, or you get to see, Florence Knoll designed furniture. I think sometimes people forget that, hence Bridget and Andrew's show that drives that home even more. But what's really interesting in our collection that's made up of the historic collections of Knoll and Herman Miller, meaning the brands themselves were collecting museum quality pieces over the years, but you get to see the output of Florence Knoll and really her architect's mind creating modular furniture. We also have some other rare pieces. One of my most exciting discoveries in the process was a Isamu Noguchi model number 9 lamp, which actually Noguchi designed a lamp for Knoll before he got into his own Akari experiments, but it's shown here in the racks on his rocking stools and tables for Knoll as well. So that's another interesting connection point. Noguchi at mid-century was commissioned by both Knoll and Herman Miller as they were launching their brands to the public. Read about it more in the catalog that Bridget and Andrew will talk about later. But not only is furniture on display, but the tooling that helped create these things. That amazing sarin and ashtray is also in the current exhibition at Cranbrook. So another example of how this collection is used not only internally, but we're also lending to institutions as well. A really special piece that we have here in our collection. So everything in here is production, more or less. Some pieces have more interesting provenance than others. We actually have the womb chair, an early version that Eero Saarinen gave his mother that you see here, Loya Saarinen, in her home at Cranbrook. It was reupholstered in the mid-70s by Pipsan Saarinen, her daughter, in this Jack Lenore Larson textile, so another Cranbrook graduate. But again, that's what's unique about the pieces in here is both their connection to the company, its designers, but also the manufacturing process as well. So you get to see other pieces from the history, Platner, Panton chairs from the mid and late 60s and early 70s for Knoll and Herman Miller, the context which these products were being created, in some cases were for what we refer to as contract settings. So, lounge areas, sometimes airports, but you really get to see a progression of furniture design, material innovation, and the context for which these companies were designing for. This is our work surface sort of display that shows you a development of thinking, the thoughts behind standing height desks coming through Robert Probst experiments for Action Office 1. Obviously, I would say Florence Knoll beat Herman Miller to the punch in a way in terms of the Knoll planning unit, but systems, office furniture, both very core to the development of these companies, and ideas definitely were bouncing back and forth between the two. Another moment of material innovation that you get to see in here, foam, definitely super hot in the 70s. This was a new material that was available to create soft seating that Herman Miller certainly was experimenting with via the Ergon chair designed by Bill Stumpf, Chadwick modular seating, and beyond. And we also get to represent the postmodernists in here, which is some of my favorite. Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown designed some amazing chairs for Knoll that definitely are a bit of a wink, as well as Ettore Sotsas. So kind of have those designers responding directly to what was happening at mid-century, with maybe a little bit of a snark and a wink, but definitely an example of Knoll kind of being at the forefront of what at the time is modern design, and engaging authored designers, architects, and beyond to create product. Knoll had an exhibition at the Louvre in the mid-70s, and Massimo and Lola Vignelli designed these huge human-scale almost posters, of which we're really excited to be able to display a full set here in the archives. So we have not only furniture, but two-dimensional material. Should you ever have a research inquiry, this is where Bridget and Andrew got to come do some of their research in our reading room. We have a design library, and again, the paper materials of the archives. And so this space not only is for literal display, but the collection itself is used, of which you're going to hear an amazing context for today. Like I said, there's printed matter, there's design drawings, there's photography. Really, if you think about what a company has to generate when developing and then selling a product, it's really remarkable what both Knoll and Herman Miller have saved over the years that now give us this amazing complete portrait of modern design and selling it. A really special piece that we have here in our collection that's now actually on display in Bridget and Andrew's show are some of Florence Knoll's own paste ups. So the way that she liked to work was applying material samples directly to a layout to really give clients an idea of what they were getting. And really, she was one of the first people to do that. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Bridget to talk about this amazing exhibition that we are so proud to be a partner in. I will say, so our space here in West Michigan is kind of appointment only. However, we're going to have some open to the public dates in October through Doko Momo Tour Days. So stay tuned. We will be letting people know once we have those confirmed, but that will be a chance if you're interested to come see the space. And with that, I'll hand it over to Andrew.
Thanks, Amy. It's such a great opportunity to partner with MillerKnoll on this exhibition. We consider it a kind of landmark exhibition at Cranbrook Art Museum. It'll be on view through September 21st, so hopefully you'll get to see it in person, but we've also included a few images of the installation in the various galleries, and I think we'll even drop a link in for a kind of virtual walkthrough that you could do if you're unable to visit the actual exhibition. As Amy mentioned, this is kind of a natural fit for us at Cranbrook Art Museum. The Art Museum, in part, stewards the history and legacy of the Cranbrook Academy of Art. And it was there that really birthed the moment of mid-century modernism in the US. Mid-century modernism is a particularly American phenomenon and design movement. And that happens in the 1930s. Actually, in the late 1930s, there was a huge cast of characters here at Cranbrook studying and practicing. People like Charles Eames, who would meet Ray Kaiser, becomes Ray Kaiser Eames, Florence Knoll, Eero Saarinen, Harry Bertoia, and others that we unearthed too, like Ruth Adler-Schnee and Jerry Kavanaugh. All make up really an amazing pantheon, and there are many others too who studied here. This is their title wall, but just on looking at this, we made an homage to the accompanying catalog, and on the cover of the catalog, we featured this textile. It's a early Knoll textile called Tracy by Esther Horazzi, another woman who pioneered in developing the printed textile movement, the use of color here using a photo collage of images by Herbert Matter, who was, of course, the art director for early Herman Miller products. If I could get the next slide. Thank you. This is the quote that the title of the show comes from. Eventually, everything connects, people, ideas, and objects. It's a quote attributed to Charles Eames, who, of course, was both a student and a faculty member, the first head of industrial design here at Cranbrook. And we love the quote because as curators, exhibitions are always about these three things: people, ideas, and objects. And the Eameses were always about connections and making connections between family and friends with ideas and techniques. And so that philosophy of finding the connections is what motivated Bridget and I when we developed the exhibition to pay homage not only to Cranbrook trained individuals, but also to move outside of the sphere of Cranbrook to look at other important mid-century designers. The next slide. And so part of the why is that in our own archive, we found this exhibition, which is very prescient. It happened in 1975, and it was an exhibition here at Cranbrook of Knoll and Herman Miller. Of course, there's a giant chasm separating both sides, but now we could erase that chasm. So now the companies are combined and the histories are combined. But for us at Cranbrook, we have deep roots in both sides of those companies, and now the one company. So to go a little bit deeper into what is mid-century modernism, of course, many people know it. When I always have to talk to the general population about it, I always mention things like Mad Men. If you know Mad Men, then you know the style of era that we're talking about. So for most people, mid-century design started in the 1950s and 1960s. But for us at Cranbrook, it actually started in the late 1930s. And we just joke that, of course, it's interrupted by World War II, which is why it becomes a really important phenomenon in the post-war period. But if we had to talk about what are the qualities of mid-century design, and then we compare that with modern design, the classic European, early 20th century European design. So if modern design was achromatic, like not a lot of color, maybe red sometimes, mid-century design really embraced color. If modern design was unembellished or lacked ornament, mid-century design embraced it. If modern design was meant to be rational, mid-century design is meant to be emotional, right? Which I think applies to why it's so long lasting now and so important still. If modern design was Eurocentric in its perspective, mid-century design really embraced non-Western influences. It was also about the handcrafted rather than the machined. It was about synthetic and natural materials coexisting, not just industrial new materials and new industrial materials. And it embraced organic forms, the curvilinear, for example, rather than the strict geometry of European modernism. And so when I say it's a completely unique American movement, that's because a lot of people left Europe and found themselves in the United States on a new kind of fertile soil to help develop these ideas and to help sell modernism to a new generation of folks. I think we're going to look at a little quick tour of the exhibition, which again is up until September 21st. And one of the first sections that you would encounter is this section on biomorphism and organic design. And we were very lucky to have on view some very, very rare objects. These are from the hand of Charles and Ray Eames, particularly noting the influence of Ray Kaiser Eames, who studied abstraction with Hans Hofmann in New York and was really part of the formal development of a lot of the furniture, especially the most classic being the LCW. But we also have examples by Gilbert Rody and Jens Rissam on kidney shape and organic formed tables as well. In the next section, we really look at wartime experimentations, which really started here at Cranbrook. On the left is a very rare prototype chair created by Charles Eames and Eero Saarinen that won the Museum of Modern Art's organic design competition. But we also include examples by Ralph Rapson, who was also a student at Cranbrook, and he was experimenting with his rapid rocker. So you see one of our two prototypes that we have. This one, the upholstery is done in leather, which was a little bit more available at the time. You also see a very rare body litter or stretcher. Most people are familiar with the Eames's leg splints, but we happen to have this amazing stretcher on view as well. Those wartime experiments continued into the post-war period, looking at fiberglass and acrylics. So here we have things like classic wound chair, which a lot of people are confused by because the fiberglass is the shell, so it's completely uncovered in upholstery. And that's a very rare upholstery from the Knoll Textiles division called transportation cloth that helps really accentuate the lines of the chair. But we also start introducing other figures into this section. Like the Lavernes, who create their incredible series of invisibles. So with the chair completely dematerializing, realizing for the first time this early modernist dream, even a dream that they had at the Bauhaus, that the best chair would be an invisible chair as part of that. So in the next section, we have to explain to people that in the post-war period, there was a great increase in leisure time, and there was a great demand in different kinds of seating. So on the far right, we have an incredible part of our collection is a very rare prototype for the asymmetric lounge that was reintroduced by Knoll, I think, in the early 2000s. But this one was made in 1952 and came out with the rest of the Diamond Collection series. And of course, in the center, incredibly rare Noguchi chess table and propeller chairs. The chess table was, we believe, just for special orders through Herman Miller, and only a few hundred were actually made. But we also have other figures in there too, like Eva Zeisel and her prototype chair, which was her answer to the butterfly chair, which the original didn't collapse, but hers did. So it was very lightweight and easily portable. Let's see the next one. We really take this idea of humanizing design as part of that mid-century movement and really embrace that. And this is perhaps most literal interpretations of that with John Risley, who's a Cranbrook sculptor, who's quite well known for doing these anthropomorphized figure chairs, in this case, a woman. But we also have very rare objects, also like the Syl Steinberg illustrated Eames chair that he visited the Eames studio and drew on their chairs. And luckily they kept them for us to enjoy later. In the next section, we have preserving the hand and really looking at the designer craftsman tradition. So these were craftspeople who were interested in large volume production. So people like Evelyn and Jerry Ackerman, who are producers of the wall textile, the wall hanging that you see behind. So that would have been designed by them, but probably manufactured, in this case, woven in Peru. You also have other important people like George Nakashima, who was developing one-off furniture in series, but also did some other experiments with furniture with Knoll. Let's see. Next one. We also did a little look at natural fibers and looking at indoor, outdoor, and rattan especially. And so here we have a lot of Asian American designers, Noguchi in collaboration with Ismail Kimochi in Japan in the far left. Pipson, Sarin, and Swanson next to it with a cast iron chair. Pipson was the daughter, sister to Eero Saarinen. And then exciting discoveries on a company called Tropical out of Los Angeles, who had roots in China and particularly Hong Kong, with greatly influenced, of course, by the pedestal chair in this case. And then we have another amazing gallery filled with textiles, which is an important story with a lot of women and designers of color as part of that, where we have on loan from the archives this amazing Alexander Gerard created environmental enrichment panel banner that was first made and hung at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis in 1975. So thanks, Amy, for that. And then we have another room which we devote just to this idea of selling modern design. We always have to remind people that modern design wasn't necessarily very popular. It was difficult to get people involved and interested in it. So they had to go through all sorts of lengths. And so this is our famous chair pyramid, which is mimicking an art-directed piece by Tomoko Miho that combines various Herman Miller and Knoll chairs so people could study the bases and the different options, whether it's wood or metal or upholstery. And then the last large gallery is devoted to this idea of the corporation, the office. So we're comparing, in this case, Action Office, the original Action Office that Amy showed some pieces of earlier, and how that would work and how that would lead into Action Office 2, which is kind of where we end the show in the late 1960s, early 1970s. But before doing that, we have one last section dealing with pop art and the influence of pop design and designers like Irving Harper for the marshmallow sofa, George Nelson with his chair and desk, of course, and then newer figures like Lucia de Respinez, who worked in the Nelson office, who designed the hanging lamp and the first two clocks on the left. Mixed with others like Jerry Kavanaugh, who designed the lovely bird on a wire textile on the right. And of course, the coconut chair was another Harper design, another icon from the catalog, should we say. So that's one more section. There's so many sections. There's 12 in all, I think. So the Jet Age is another one. On the right, you're looking at an amazing archival model from our collection. It's one of the very few surviving models from the Eero Saarinen office for Dulles Airport's design, and it does light up. The original did light up. Quite incredible, along with some designs by Herman Miller for the Braniff Airlines lounges. And in the middle, an experimental plastic-based formed experimental airport seating by George Nelson that unfortunately never went into production. So I'll just conclude my section by reminding people of the catalog. So if you can't see the show, you can certainly get the catalog. And the catalog is even more expansive than the exhibition. It comes in at just under 500 pages. It has 28 contributions by 28 new scholars from all around the world. So there's about 23 essays and 76 spotlights highlighting all sorts of individuals that we couldn't include in the show, and ones that are in the show. So I'm going to turn it over to my co-curator, Bridget Bartal, who's going to do a little bit deeper dive into what we mean by eventually everything connects.
Can everyone hear me okay? Good to go? Okay. Yeah, so in the early stages of my research, I've been working as the MillerKnoll Curatorial Fellow here in support of Andrew for the past 3 years. And basically from the jump, really the goal of the show was to build out Cranbrook Art Museum's permanent design collection, which ultimately resulted in about 60 new acquisitions of textiles, furniture, and lighting design that helped us diversify our canon of Cranbrook graduates that were well collected. But really from day one of the research to kind of get into the archives and try to uncover some new and kind of unsung figures in the movement. And so one of the ways we kind of take on the connections theme, which you'll see in the foreword to the book, but also in several of the presentations we've done. We're using this July 1961 Playboy article that many of you are probably very familiar with, this famous photo from the Designs for Living article by John Anderson. And the article really kind of is a very prescient article charting the state of the design movement moving into the 60s, and of course points out these six canonic figures, all who are white men. From left, we have George Nelson, Ed Wormley, Eero Saarinen, Harry Bertoia, Charles Eames, and Jens Rissam. And so what we really learned for this photo, we learned just as much from who is there as we learned from who is not in the photo and who's not represented. And so perhaps most obviously, is this showing, is it showing that I'm flipping through the slides at this point? Looks frozen on my screen. But most, is it now? Okay, most obviously, Ray Eames, the business, creative, and romantic partner of Charles, who they would collaborate for decades, and really their creative output became inextricable, but also Florence Knoll, who was the design director of Knoll, but also a furniture designer, interior designer, and trained architect. And these two women are mentioned very briefly in Anderson's article, but Ray is kind of unfortunately called Charles's sculptress wife, and Florence is mentioned only parenthetically to Eero as a formidable design talent. So that's really the two quotes you get about those two women. But let's kind of, before getting into some other figures, unpack all of the connections in the photo. We of course have Charles Eames and Eero Saarinen, who meet at Cranbrook Academy of Art and begin working on their designs for the organic design competition in 1940, amongst other projects. We have Harry Bertoia's connection to the Eames, another Cranbrook connection. Bertoia also follows the Eames out to California and really plays a large part in their molded plywood experiments and innovation, but just is not quite getting the credit he feels he deserves, and so eventually is sniped by Florence Knoll, as we discussed. We have George Nelson, the design director of Herman Miller, who would invite on Alexander Gerard and Charles and Ray Eames to design for the company. And then we also have Florence, who is, again, inviting on her Cranbrook colleagues, but also deciding as she gains more and more power at Knoll that she's kind of going to move away from these Scandinavian roots of the Rissams and the Rapsons and kind of kick them off the design roster. But of course, she works with her close colleague, Eero, her kind of almost her brother, and then Bertoia, who was a lifelong collaborator and friend. But there's one person who's probably, maybe you're noticing, the odd man out of the group, kind of the outlier, which is Edward J. Wormley, who's the design director for Dunbar Furniture Company of Indiana. etc. And Wormley is not quite as socially connected or professionally connected to all of these figures, but he played a really large part in pioneering transitional furniture. As we've kind of discussed on this call, we really can't overstate how alien modern design may have looked to the average American consumer who was living with historic revival styles, possibly Chippendale furniture. And so figures like Wormley are very, very important and sometimes under-acknowledged for designing transitional furniture that helped Americans to slowly ease a consumer into modernism. You could buy one of his maybe less kind of high modern pieces that would marry well with your historic revival styles and let you slowly make that introduction. But Wormley also, at least in his close circles, was openly gay and had a lifelong partner of almost 50 years, Edward Krauss, who did some odd jobs for Dunbar and also helped design a few exhibition displays for Wormley's Janus collection. So another figure who we wrote about for the book and who's certainly not absent from design histories, but perhaps now not quite as popular as Nelson or Eames, etc. And so next we wanted to kind of chart in, beyond just the people I mentioned, like the addition of Florence and Ray, who now are kind of common names in mid-century design, we really wanted to uncover another set of figures who we could spotlight in our book. And we did that through the 75 spotlights that each provided a portrait and also a biography for future researchers to kind of latch onto. And in the exhibition, what this looks like were little plaques dedicated to specific underrepresented designers that, again, gave a face to the name and a little bit of background on them. So in the last 10 or so minutes, I'm just going to highlight a few of the figures that I conducted research on. And there's much more to explore in the book, but getting started here, one of the people who was an absolute joy to write about was architectural photographer Pedro Guerrero, who is most known as being the personal photographer to Frank Lloyd Wright for decades. He was very loyal to Wright, and when he passed away, he promised he wouldn't work with another architect, so he starts working with Alexander Calder and then Louis Nevelson. But he's really this kind of incredible architectural photographer who is just totally lost in the shadows of, let's say, like the Balthazar Korabs, Julius Schulman, Ezra Stoller, and others, but definitely someone who I want to undertake more research into. Minoru Yamasaki is a Detroit-based architect, most known as the architect of two no longer standing buildings, World Trade Center, but also the Pruitt-Igoe housing complexes in St. Louis. But he was very, very well connected to all of the aforementioned people we have gone through. A best friend to George Nelson. They talked about starting an architecture firm together, and ultimately it fell through, but they stayed connected throughout their lives. He also was a frequent collaborator with Florence Knoll and worked with the Knoll Planning Unit on the McGregor Memorial Conference Center, which you see on the screen. It's a 1958 project at Wayne State University in Detroit, often kind of considered Yamasaki's architectural gem. And we know that Yamasaki almost always specified Knoll for his projects, even if he wasn't working directly with the planning unit. Yamasaki was also a very close friend of Harry Bertoia. He commissioned a large sculpture screen for the St. Louis airport and worked with Bertoia extensively. Next, I'll touch on Ruth Adler-Schnee, a 1946 graduate of the Cranbrook Academy of Art, someone whose textile designs easily rival the whimsicality of Alexander Gerard, though she is maybe not perhaps as well known. At Cranbrook, we sing her praises, and sometimes I have to kind of reorient myself or recalibrate myself to the idea that she's actually, within design history, still relatively underrepresented. But so she set up a design shop in Detroit where she would sell the designs of Herman Miller and Knoll. It was a place for local people to come and get their share of modernism, but also she sold her own textiles out of the shop, and her business partner was her husband, Edward Schnee, who would name her textiles kind of just cheeky names and often puns that were quite endearing. Joel Robinson is a textile designer turned art director who, if you've heard of MoMA's Good Design shows, they were kind of these shows to prescribe good, affordable, modern design to the masses, even putting in the catalogs what department stores you could purchase these pieces at. Robinson was the only Black designer featured in MoMA's Good Design shows, but he actually shows up in 3 of the 5 exhibitions, which was quite a feat. In 1952, he had this really long feature in Ebony magazine, and it really seemed that he was poised for this incredible career. And yet, by the mid to late 50s, his name drops out. You don't hear of him designing another textile in his lifetime. But he did have a very notable career in advertising and art direction after that point. And so he's one of these people who his professional papers are not held by any museum, library, or archive. So we still have a lot of unanswered questions about his story. More than likely, he was pushed out of the industry due to just discriminatory hiring practices, so prevalent in design firms at the time. But I've also been wondering lately of kind of just his agency and perhaps seeing that there was more money in art direction or in advertising, and that perhaps it was an advantageous pivot. And so I can't say for certain, maybe it was a combination of the two, but he has a really interesting story that I'd love to learn more about. We'll also briefly mention Pipsan Saarinen Swanson, the sister of Eero Saarinen, and perhaps the most unknown member of the Saarinen family, but she was a prolific textile designer, furniture designer, and interior designer who just had a very multifaceted career. And we have a lot of her works in the show. Just 2 more figures here to point out. Rei Komai was a Japanese-American furniture designer, textile designer, and graphic designer, kind of similarly to Robinson, perhaps. He started out more so in textiles and in furniture design, and then ultimately ends up transitioning almost completely to graphic design, becoming a very celebrated graphic designer of his era, working for the United States Information Agency, and also my favorite, he designs, I think, 47 or 48 covers for Architectural Forum, and they're just some of the coolest covers, definitely worth checking out. I know there's a whole website dedicated to compiling those covers. And lastly, a member of George Nelson's office. George Nelson had relatively progressive hiring practices for the 50s and 60s. There were several women like Tomoko Miho working in the office, but only one woman working in industrial design. And that's Lucia Drespinez. I think she's with Nelson from about 1956 to 63, doing exhibition design, clocks, other products, etc. And she only leaves Nelson's office when she said she's too pregnant to lean over her drafting table anymore. But a decade or so later, in 1976, she actually designs the Dunkin' Donuts logo that's still in use today, which is maybe the thing she's most recognized and remembered for. But she was just a powerhouse designer and one of only 2 living designers in the show, we believe. She is in her 90s and still very, just, I think she said she retired from Pratt Institute at age 91 or 92 when her glaucoma didn't allow her to teach on Zoom during COVID. So definitely another person to look out for. That is all I have as far as our group. Do we want to maybe field some questions, or Amy, anything you'd like to touch on? Yeah, is anything in the chat?
I would just say we lent 40 objects to the show from our collection, which was really exciting.
Yeah.
Rebecca, I see your question. How do MK and Cranbrook envision staying connected into the future? I don't think we'll be able to get rid of each other. And actually, so as it relates to new designers, Leon Ransmeyer, who is on the Herman Miller designer roster and also a co-author on the Herman Miller A Way of Living book, is actually now the head of the industrial design program at Cranbrook. So it really all comes back around. And I guess in 100 years' time, wow. I don't know. I hope we're celebrating new materials that are being used.
Yeah, we have in addition to the exhibition here, we have what we call the collections wing, which is our open archive. So it's an open art storage facility. It's one of the first ones in the United States. It opened in 2011, and so we have a furniture display there and other design displays as well as art. But since we're trying to connect the two, since we're across the state from one another in Michigan, we're trying to connect the east side and the west side of the state. And so now that Amy has her collections wing and we have ours, I think that we can have more traffic between both institutions.
Mm-hmm.
You included so many wonderful pieces, and it's clear that there are so many amazing connections at Cranbrook, some more well-known than others. And I imagine, or I'm asking, is there anything significant that you just couldn't put in the show that you would have, if you would have had more square footage, more time, or anything that you would have added into this collection?
What do you think, Bridget?
Something that's always difficult and something you see a lot more of in the exhibition and the book than in the exhibition is besides these kind of clunky, large architectural models, what is the best way to include architecture in this story that was more of a furniture, textile, and lighting design show? And so there are definitely just so many rich connections, but of course, between architecture and design in the show that ultimately just couldn't be physically represented in the space, but you get more of those architects in the book, I think.
Yeah, there's definitely, we thought what would happen is that once we had the show in the book, that more folks would be unearthed. And so we tried to cover as many as possible in the book up to when we had to send it to the printer. But it seems like every day there's another figure that comes forward. That's really important. Yeah.
Yeah, one other example that comes to mind of someone that really only could show up in the book is this designer, Addison Bates. He's a craftsman and designer who is mostly doing built-ins for apartments in Manhattan. And so unfortunately, I could not locate any existing design. And if it is, it's probably in someone's apartment that I would not, ever know about or have access to. But we really wanted to include him in the book.
Yeah, that's a good point. That along with architecture and interior design is very hard to show and to collect because people change their rooms and their environments all the time. And so to find something like a time capsule is quite rare. And so there are undoubtedly a lot of folks in that category that we tried to show in a different way. Amy mentioned some of the Florence Knoll pay stubs. So she's the originator and inventor of that technique for the field of interior design. And so we have many of those in the show, probably the largest collection of them we could get our hands on. So those are also lovely to see, but it's really hard to represent. I think somebody was asking in the chat about, I think this presentation will go onto a YouTube channel that is part of your design perspectives. And then we'll probably also have, if it's not already in the link, a link to our Matterport walkthrough, which you can also find on our website at cranbrookartmuseum.org. Yes.
So many of these artists and designers met while attending, right? They were students. Is there anything significant that's being inspired by students now that, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, you kind of anticipate a new catalog, new inspiration?
Yes, well, we do actually, since the Academy still very much exists. It's the only art school of that era. Like the Bauhaus, of course, closed, but the Academy still lives on. And so we still collect out of those exhibitions. So we do have prototypes that students have made. There have, in the last 10 years or so, there's been a great interest in sort of what we call limited edition furnitures and a lot of material experiments, and that spirit of the Eameses lives on in that way. So there's all these crazy materials that are used now that are really make for amazing designs. And so we do actively collect all of that. So we see it as like history in the making here. So 50 years from now or 80 years from now, somebody will be doing something, we hope, about whatever happened here.
I would say too, what was the date cutoff you guys kind of stopped at for this?
Kind of early 70s.
Okay. So, I mean, even in more recent history, we're still collaborating with Cranbrook designers. I think one notable is Steve Frickholm, who was Herman Miller's first in-house graphic designer and responsible for the great picnic posters. But then also just a few years ago, Knoll Textiles released some work by Nick Cave, and so another Cranbrook grad. So I think the connections remain, and also I think that spirit and notion of collaborating with artists to make product, and that exchange continues on.
Oh yeah, there's other just even hearing that, Amy, there's antenna design, Masamichi Udogawa is the Cranbrook graduate. We use that system as our open plan office system here at the museum. Because we're not allowed to use anything that's not Herman Miller given our history.
Jennifer put in the chat too, Jonathan Mickey, who is more recent Cranbrook grad, who not only have, I think we are the largest collector of Mickey sculpture work. I don't know if you'd call it sculpture, but work in our showrooms. And then we've also recently launched this summer Mickey wood furniture. So again, like another sort of in the spirit of Harry Bertoia, someone who, Florence Knoll had creating furniture for the Knoll line, but also commissioning sculpture, environmental enrichment, you could call it, for showrooms, styling of photography, but certainly like ethos that is coming through in the Knoll brand today. I see Kazuki asked if the show is traveling. Unfortunately, it is not.
It is not, although we never say never, right?
Yeah, never say never. If there are any curators on the call who are interested in taking it, but I would say the exhibition is catalog, or the exhibition catalog is available anywhere where books are sold. And I think, as Bridget said, it's not the stuff in person, but the stories are even more expansive in the catalog.
Yeah. Definitely.
Right. And it's a lovely time to visit Michigan too. So you can sneak that last visit. We've had so many people visiting in the last couple of weeks, actually. So it's been a really a wonderful treat. It runs through September 21st. So it closes Sunday, September 21st, the exhibition. So you still have some time.
I see a question, Bridget and Andrew. Any archival surprises, favorites from the MillerKnoll Archives that were either included or inspiring?
I think we took them all online.
Yeah.
if they were, we were debating about the lamp, and then we were like, oh, where did we put this lamp? Because the lamp was in so much better shape than you usually find those paper lamps, the early Noguchi lamps. So that was really a nice surprise that we didn't take, I guess. But also our shout out to the Henry Ford Museum, because they also were another major lender, and a lot of people don't realize just how extensive their design collection is. So if you're visiting us, they're just in Dearborn, so just down the road. So I would definitely make time to visit their museum. Lots there to see.
Yeah. And like we cannot say enough how advantageous it was to be a Michigan-based museum in this in curating a mid-century design show. In, like Amy mentioned, having 40 pieces from MillerKnoll, just shy of 40 from the Henry Ford, General Motors Technical Center, which is just a who's who of mid-century modern architects and designers, is 30 to 40 minutes from us, and lent some objects. And so even as far as the logistics, the unsexy logistics of shipping and crating, being Michigan-based was very great.
And the fact that we're a manufacturing company that also is shipping furniture all the time, we really got to tap into all of our colleagues at MillerKnoll to help make this happen. And actually, as Bridget just said, a big part of archives is logistics. And when it's furniture, that usually means trucks, which are fun.
Yes. Thanks, MillerKnoll, for all of your logistics and archival and historical and sponsorship help around making this kind of show come to fruition. It's kind of rare, actually, kind of ironically, that we would have a show like this. We've had individual monographic shows like George Nelson and Alexander Gerard, but never an all-encompassing survey of this important time period for both companies and for Cranbrook.
I'll say too, just as MillerKnoll, and what does that mean for people in the design world, for clients, for other designers? And I think being able to work on this show at Cranbrook really helped sort of shape that for people to understand. I mean, it was sort of what was in my mind on the Better Than Christmas morning when I found out Knoll was going to be part of the crew. But really, I think through projects like this, to use the word, like, start to see the connections between the companies, the designers, and really just interiors that have been created with those two companies over time, as well as the many others who are part of the show, where again, you get to see the conversations between materials, forms, and that sharing of ideas that I think was really prevalent at the time. So thanks to Andrew and Bridget for helping us do that and offering a third-party endorsement of a MillerKnoll pretty early on in the experiment.
Yeah, I think I was going to tease that what's coming next. For us, it takes a while to make these things. So in summer 27, we're planning for Harry Bertoia, another important Cranbrook designer.
You heard it here first. That's
So it's committing me publicly.
Amazing.
We have a question. Any feedback from your current students?
Oh, well, they haven't started back yet. So they start back on September 10th, I think. They come back right after Labor Day. So some of the former students helped us set up the show in June. And so it's always amazing when they can, it's this weird connection because not a lot of people have attended the academy. It's a very small institution. And so you always feel a connectedness through anyone who has studied here. And so to be able to handle their work, we had a lot of nice surprises too from our own archive, because we have more than 8,000 objects in our collection. And we have a lot of textiles, for instance, but the textiles, how they're stored is they're rolled up and then rolled in muslin. So you don't really see them, right? Unless you unroll it. And so we were going through, and Bridget was having a lot of fun going through. We were filling up some of the wall space, and we came across some of the most amazing textiles, including the first textile from Herman Miller by Alexander Gerard. And we have a very pristine, amazing, it probably hasn't been shown since the 1950s. So it was a really wonderful set of unboxing surprises.
Yeah, we have a lot of unboxing and like antiques roadshow vibes in our jobs. I think this definitely was a occasion for it. And as Andrew just said, I mean, what was interesting and exciting for me is that early Gerard textile that's included was accessioned like the year it was introduced. So, yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting to go back and think about contemporary design collecting, which certainly is what we have ahead of us here as MillerKnoll, but just great examples of that happening even at mid-century. Someone asked, can you explain a little bit as to the Miller-Knoll partnership emerged? Well, Andrew and I bumped into each other at Palm Springs Modernism Week, and the rest is history. And then we were lucky that Bridget also emerged as an amazing inaugural Miller-Knoll curatorial fellow from her background at Bard. So timing is everything.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and when the
timing
merger,
totally is everything.
yeah, definitely. And when the merger happened, it was like perfect.
Mm.
It was like, finally.
You spoke a bit about mid-century modern really bringing this humanistic aspect to design. And if you do have the opportunity to attend an exhibit at Cranbrook, whether it's this one or one in the future, take time to walk the campus. It's fun to be there when the students are in session and seeing them connecting. We talk so much about human connection today, either in our homes with our families, even what we're trying to convey in our public spaces, our academies, healthcare, and even workplace. When you go to the campus and you walk the campus, you can feel it. And it's understandable once you're there that this amazing talent and these connections that lasted a lifetime emerged. Even though many of these designers, went their separate paths, some Herman Miller, some Knoll, some other. There's many stories of different individuals that you start to chat with. They were friends. They kept their connections. They didn't have cell phones. It wasn't easy. They weren't texting every day, right? But they kept their connections. And it's not surprising when you experience it. So if you do have the opportunity to experience it, please do. This exhibit will run till September 21st. As Amy mentioned, opportunities to go to West Michigan, also to our headquarters there through Docomomo. So please look at their site to find those dates in October. Are there any parting thoughts you'd like to share here as we hit the top of the hour?
I was just going to reiterate your comments that you're always welcome to come visit us at Cranbrook. We're kind of in the heart of the campus. It's the most amazing and most beautiful designed campuses in the world. And we have a National Historic Landmark status that kind of backs that up. But if you know anything about the Saarinen, every aspect has been designed. So if you're very much into design, like literally nature, every piece of nature, every building, everything in a building, it's very comprehensive and so unusual to experience, especially in the United States. So we encourage as many people to visit as possible.